Alex is a managed services architect here at MicroStrategies, and he is going to be discussing with us operating in a hybrid multi-cloud world. Alex, thanks for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Kelly. Appreciate it. So, so I'm looking at all the topics that we've been discussing today, and it really is an amazing place that cloud technologies have gotten us to in the business world. There's been an amazing evolution of infrastructure and practical computing as a whole, and these technologies have really enabled doing business, ways of doing business that are more useful to today's needs and closer to how people live their lives and how they want to work at the end of the day. I'm here to talk a little bit about the operational side of those cloud technologies, what happens when that application goes instantly into a legacy mode, the day after it's deployed, the day after it goes live, as the team has mentioned. So there's some myths that tend to come along with operating these solutions and operating these cloud technologies, and operations is not the sexiest topic in the world, so I'll keep things relatively brief here at the end so everyone can grab lunch soon. But long story short, there's a handful of myths that are important that we see happening and repeating and coming out of our clients' mindsets over and over again, and I want to speak to three major ones. Those myths have kind of grown in this shadow because cloud technologies have a little bit of a danger of suffering from an out of sight, out of mind mentality. There's no longer any blinking orange lights on a server rack for technology support personnel can look at at a glance, right? Now it's all about software-defined monitoring, instrumentation, telemetry, and then distributing that telemetry in a way that can be automated and, when necessary, for a human to intervene and correct issues. As the world kind of pivots to that type of operations model, there's some concerns that are popping up, and these myths really tie back to that. So the lack of transparency from major cloud technology providers. There's been a great initial experience with these cloud technology providers, but that lack of transparency hides some of the weaknesses, and experienced organizations that are deploying these cloud technologies are discovering that the cloud doesn't really solve traditional infrastructure needs, and I'll go into more detail in a little bit. The ease of deploying these cloud technologies is a fantastic strength, but it's also a weakness. So just as easy it is to deploy a cloud technology, it's just as easy to misconfigure that cloud technology, and that may have side effects such as incurring unexpected or unanticipated operating costs, bills from pay-as-you-go models for public cloud providers, and introduces a new avenue of human error that is that organizations that find ways to manage and to mitigate, they find themselves in a beneficial place from a business perspective. So I want to talk about those three myths, and we'll start with a quick poll idea that I had for the audience, and so I would like to ask the audience, what is the greatest source of data loss for SaaS services? So 32% of companies that are using SaaS services have reported data loss in some form or another on those platforms. So we have 5 different options here. Is there hackers or malicious parties from external malicious or internal malicious parties, closing accounts, so that's unintentionally abandoned data. We have user error. We have malicious delete, so that would be an internal security threat, technically classified that way. And then we also have third-party software. So these could be integrations that are not implemented correctly that facilitate the unintentional overwriting of production data. So I'd like you guys to think about that and put that into the chat. Which one of those options do you think are the greatest source of data loss for SaaS services today? So moving on to the first myth, I'd like to cover one that I hear a tremendous amount, which is that public cloud doesn't need to be managed. So many organizations have learned painful lessons trying to deploy and manage public cloud infrastructure. We've all seen the headlines, PII on millions of customers exposed, data lost, painful transition costs, right? So we've seen these organizations, want to take advantage and really are sold on the marketing and on the advantages that are sold to them, and then they run into these barriers, they run into these stumbling blocks. And in part, that's because the number of platforms that a single organization leverages for their technology footprint is arguably greater than ever. And I often ask clients, who's helping you manage that complexity? And what would you rather spend time on? Would you rather spend time on configuring AWS VPCs and securing S3 buckets? Or would you rather look at and audition different cloud technologies to see what is appropriate to apply in a strategic way to your business to achieve a competitive advantage or cost savings with that technology, and all the ways that our panelists have been discussing today. So instead of worrying about how you're operating your technology, you can say, you can spend time investigating technologies like IBM OpenShift, that cloud operating system that Bob was discussing earlier. And that technology can enable efficiencies, both cost efficiencies and operational efficiencies that traditional platforms can't achieve, it can't reach. So once you've selected a technology like OpenShift, it's still up to your organization, still your organization's responsibility to make sure it's configured correctly to keep up with your business needs and to deliver that return on investment that you were expecting going into that transformation. Having an experienced partner in managing the cloud also helps you navigate new demands on your infrastructure. These demands come from many different places. These demands can come from new clients, new vendors, new business needs internally, even natural disasters. So we see regularly new demands placed on infrastructure, especially as the pace of change in the world continues to increase. One example is in the wake of COVID, our managed services practice here at MSI saw unprecedented demand to augment infrastructure to support remote workers. And we're proud to say that we met the needs of every single one of those clients. And our team was able to pivot and help our clients remove some of those boundaries and create more boundless infrastructure, as Bob helpfully coined earlier. So at the end of the day, a cloud technology partner is going to help you bake modularity, scalability, and standard interfaces into your cloud technology footprint. And that helps to remove barriers that are not only apparent and causing pain for you today, but it also helps prevent them tomorrow. Because as we know from our past experience, these barriers can grow over time. And shadow IT plays into that, because shadow IT occurs because of a need that's perceived at the ground level by the employees who are carrying out their tasks on a day-to-day basis, and then they find shortcomings in the tools that the corporation presents and authorizes, right? So having an experienced cloud technology partner helps you identify those needs earlier on in the deployment cycle, and then lets you mitigate the risk from having those tools or replacing those tools with a version that mitigates that risk in your organization. So myth number 2 is this goes back to what I was mentioning earlier about some of those traditional infrastructure needs that many entrants into the cloud technology infrastructure discover or stumble upon. And one that the cloud doesn't need backup or disaster recovery functionality. So as I mentioned before, cloud infrastructure is both simpler and more complex, right? So you can configure an AWS VPC with just a few lines of code. A few lines of code can provide access to individual IP addresses, or it can open up that VPC to the whole world for anyone to access, right? So that's a radically different situation than the traditional setting up of a router or firewall, where there's literally dozens of configuration screens, lists of rules to add, to modify, remove, and tailor to whatever the application's needs are. Um, so the opportunity for misconfiguration is much higher. So these firewalls have had features built into them to guide you toward a predefined set of functionality, whereas VPCs, to use just an example from AWS, they allow you to define your own functionality. So the amount of experience needed to properly and securely configure that piece of infrastructure is higher from a base level. So I also ask clients that discuss these topics with, I gauge their reaction when I say, oh, what are you doing for disaster recovery for your cloud infrastructure? Many of them see it as superfluous. Many of them see it as not being necessary because, as I mentioned before, the cloud has been so reliable in most cases. But my response is the same. How much downtime can you afford as an organization? How much does downtime cost you per hour? And as cloud enables scale that's very accessible very quickly, that cost can be very low some hours of the day, but that cost can also be very high depending on how the business is taking advantage of the cloud. So we recently had an experience a few weeks ago of a very popular cloud provider providing hosted email services going down for multiple times in a span of a few days. So an experienced cloud provider can help you identify how to provide redundancy for specific functionality. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the cloud level. It could be on the application level, where the application has features that make up or provide redundancy in the face of underlying infrastructure becoming unavailable. But that partner will be able to know your infrastructure well enough so that you can identify the most cost-effective way to mitigate that risk. But at the end of the day, the same tools are needed to protect against that user error and those outages, as they've always been. It's backing up your cloud configurations. It's backing up or having a contingency plan for if that cloud infrastructure becomes unavailable, whether that means operating in a reduced functionality somewhere else, or providing for identical systems in an alternate physical location, depending on the criticality of that functionality, right? So an experienced cloud technology partner can make sure your disaster recovery and your backups are ready to protect your business, and that they deliver the value, the return on the investment that you put into it. So I'd like to go ahead and reveal those poll results. I've got, so at the end of the day, user error is the highest percentage of that. So user error accounts for 64% of all instances of data loss for companies that have experienced data loss via SaaS solutions. So I find people are very surprised about that, and that's where backup and disaster recovery can come in. They can mitigate that user error going forward. And that's the source for that we have is StorageCraft, and at the end of the day, IDG and Gartner agree. They anticipate that in 2020, 95% of cloud security incidents will be the customer's fault. So that's via misconfiguration. That's via inexperience in making sure that cloud is secured in a way that's different than traditional technology. So I know Kelly's back on the screen. I'd just like to wrap up real quick. The main takeaway that I'd like to have everyone take home is to think about how you may be able to refocus your technology team away from operations necessarily to taking advantage of cloud technology in a strategic way to serve the business. This way you're in the strategic driver's seat rather than always feeling like you're playing catch up. So I'm going to pass it back to Kelly and the rest of the team. And thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Alex, for sharing with us today. We truly appreciate your contributions.